There were no candles on my birthday cake, only 100 relatives watching. My father slid a dossier across the table like a plea deal, while my mother silently removed my picture from the wall. Then my boss stood up and fired me right there at the dinner table. I did not cry. I simply walked out into the night to turn my silence into the weapon that would eventually destroy them. My name is Scarlett Davis. Today, I turned 32 years old. I drove toward my parents' house in the affluent suburbs of Raleigh, North Carolina, expecting the usual passive-aggressive commentary on my single status or my career choice. The invitation had been explicit about the start time. 7 in the evening, dinner served promptly, attendance mandatory. That was the Blake family way. We did not celebrate. We convened. When I pulled my car into the long, winding driveway, I noticed the first anomaly. The driveway was not just full, it was overflowing. There were cars parked on the manicured fescue grass, a violation of my father's strictest rule. I recognized the vehicles: Uncle Ray's battered truck, Aunt Diane's pristine Lexus, Cousin Mike's sports car. It looked less like a birthday dinner and more like a funeral procession where the corpse had not yet been informed of their own demise. I walked up the front steps, the humidity of the North Carolina evening sticking my blouse to my back. I reached for the handle, but the door opened before I could touch it. It wasn't a greeter, it was simply unlatched, as if the house itself was a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. I stepped into the dining hall. The air conditioning was set to a frigid 65 degrees. The silence was absolute. It hit me harder than a physical blow. In the center of the room, the long mahogany dining table had been extended to its maximum length, and smaller folding tables had been added to the perimeter, creating a U-shape that dominated the space. Every seat was filled. There were no balloons. There was no cake. There were no brightly wrapped boxes stacked on the credenza. There were just people, 100 of them, my aunts, uncles, cousins, second cousins, and people I only saw at weddings and burials were all seated, their hands folded in their laps or clutching napkins with white-knuckled intensity. They did not look at me. They looked at their empty porcelain plates. The room vibrated with the collective tension of a jury about to deliver a death sentence. My father, Gordon Blake, sat at the head of the main table. He did not smile. He did not stand up to hug me. He barely acknowledged my entrance with a nod, the kind a CEO gives to a late intern. He pointed to the single empty wooden chair placed explicitly in the center of the U-shape. Facing him, it was the position of the accused. I walked to the chair. The sound of my heels clicking on the hardwood floor echoed like gunshots in a canyon. I sat down. Gordon cleared his throat. It was a dry, authoritative sound that commanded the room to attention. He placed his hands on the table, palms flat. "We are not here to celebrate," Gordon said, his voice level and devoid of any paternal warmth. "We are here to settle accounts." He reached under the table and produced a thick, spiral-bound dossier. It was heavy. When he shoved it across the polished wood toward me, it made a rasping sound that seemed to tear through the silence. The cover was clear plastic. The title page was typed in bold. Sans serif font. Statement of financial liability. I stared at it. I did not reach for it. "Open it," Gordon commanded. I flipped the cover. It was a spreadsheet. A ledger. It went back 32 years. I saw an entry for obstetric services, 1992. I saw an entry for formula and diapers, 1993. I saw entries for orthodontics, public school field trips, piano lessons, clothing allowance, gasoline. At the bottom of the final page, there was a grand total, bolded and double underlined, $312,480.00. Gordon leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked at the room, ensuring his audience was captivated. Before locking his eyes on mine, "You have lived off this family's resources for too long without providing a return on investment," he said. "This is the bill. Scarlett, we have calculated the cost of raising you. We have adjusted for inflation. This is what you owe us for the burden of your existence." I felt a cold numbness spread from my fingertips up to my shoulders. It was not shock. It was clarity. This was not a tantrum. This was a transaction. Before I could speak, my mother, Marianne, stood up. She was wearing a stiff blue dress that cost more than my first car. She did not look at me. She walked over to the wall behind Gordon, where the family gallery was displayed. There were dozens of photos in matching silver frames, graduation photos, vacation snapshots, the visual history of the Blake dynasty. She reached up and took hold of the frame containing my college graduation portrait. It was the only photo of me on that specific wall. Without a word, she unhooked it. She walked to the sidebar table, placed the frame face down on the wood, and returned to her seat. The sound of the glass hitting the wood was soft, a dull thud. Yet it felt final. The rectangle of lighter paint left on the wall behind Gordon looked like a fresh scar. The room remained silent. Aunt Diane took a sip of water, her hand trembling slightly. Uncle Ray stared at a spot on the ceiling. They were witnesses, complicit in their passivity. Then, the movement shifted to my left. My younger sister, Haley. She was 28. Glowing with the kind of polished perfection that required hours of maintenance and thousands of dollars. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were hard, like marbles. She reached into her purse and pulled out a set of car keys. My car keys. Or rather, the spare set I kept in the kitchen drawer at home for emergencies. She placed them on the table and spun them with her index finger. The metal keys hissed as they rotated on the wood. Daddy transferred the title to me this morning, Haley said. Her voice was light, conversational, as if she were discussing the weather. Since you owe the family $312,000, we are liquidating assets to cover the down payment. The Honda is in my name now. You can leave the main keys on the table when you go. I looked at her. I remembered driving her to soccer practice in that car. I remembered picking her up from parties at 2 a.m. when she was too drunk to drive, terrified Mom and Dad would find out. I had paid every monthly installment on that car for 5 years, but because my credit had been thin when I bought it, Gordon had insisted on putting his name on the title for insurance purposes. It was a trap set 5 years ago, springing shut only now. I still said nothing. My heart rate had slowed, not quickened. My mind, trained in systems analysis and security protocols, was categorizing the data. Threat level critical. Asset forfeiture confirmed. Social isolation in progress. Gordon looked toward the double doors that led to the foyer. We are almost done, he said. There is one last matter of business. The doors opened. A man walked in. He looked pale, sweating, clutching a leather briefcase as if it were a shield. He wore a suit that was slightly too large for him. It was Evan Caldwell, my direct manager at Stonehaven Data Works. The absurdity of his presence in my parents' dining room was so high that I almost laughed, but I didn't. I watched him walk to the end of the table. He refused to meet my gaze. He looked at Gordon, who gave him a sharp nod of permission. Evan cleared his throat. He pulled a single sheet of paper from his briefcase. His hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. Scarlett, Evan said, his voice cracking. Due to emerging concerns regarding your ethical alignment and compatibility with company values, Stonehaven Data Works is terminating your employment, effective immediately. He recited the corporate script like a hostage reading a ransom note. We have disabled your access badges and revoked your network credentials as of 5 o'clock this afternoon, he continued, rushing the words to get them out. This is an at-will employment state. No severance will be offered. He placed the paper on the table next to the dossier. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. 100 pairs of eyes fixed on me. They were waiting. They were waiting for the breakdown. They wanted the scream. They wanted me to throw the dossier at my father. They wanted me to beg my mother to put the picture back. They wanted me to scream at Haley for stealing my car. They wanted me to plead with Evan for my job. Gordon leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a twisted victory. He had orchestrated a public execution of my life. He had stripped me of my past, the debt, my present, the car, and my future, the job. He had invited an audience to ensure the humiliation was permanent. If I screamed, I validated them. If I cried, I entertained them. I looked at the dossier, $312,480. I looked at the empty spot on the wall. I looked at the car keys. I looked at Evan, who was now wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor. The sound made 3 of my cousins jump. I did not look at Gordon. I did not look at Marianne. I reached out and picked up the dossier. I did not open it again. I simply closed the cover and tucked it under my arm. Then, I reached into my purse. I pulled out my primary set of car keys. I didn't hand them to Haley. I didn't put them on the table. I dropped them on the floor. They landed with a harsh jangle near the leg of the table. Haley would have to crawl on her hands and knees to get them. I turned around. Scarlett Gordon barked. His voice had lost a fraction of its control. He had expected a fight. He didn't know how to handle a vacuum. I walked toward the door. My heels clicked. 1 step, 2 steps. I passed Aunt Diane. She looked down at her lap. I passed Uncle Ray. He took a long drink of his wine. I passed Evan. He flinched as I walked by, as if he thought I might strike him. I reached the double doors. I paused, my hand on the brass handle. I did not look back. I did not utter a single word of defense. I did not give them the satisfaction of a single tear. I opened the door and stepped out into the humid night air. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing the tomb. I stood on the porch for a moment, listening to the crickets. I had no car. I had no job. I had a debt the size of a mortgage hanging over my head. I had no family. But as I adjusted the heavy dossier under my arm, I realized something. Gordon Blake had made a critical error. He thought he was handing me a bill. He thought he was handing me a record of my burden. He was wrong. In his arrogance, he had handed me a paper trail. He had handed me dates. He had handed me financial figures. He had handed me the evidence of 32 years of structured financial manipulation. They thought they had just erased me from the family history. In reality, they had just handed me the key to unlock the entire vault of their secrets. I began to walk down the long driveway, the gravel crunching under my feet, ready to burn their perfect world to the ground. The asphalt of the suburban road was cooling beneath my feet as I walked away from the house where I had spent 18 years of my life. The humidity of the North Carolina night wrapped around me like a wet blanket, but I felt strangely cold. I did not have a car, and my apartment was 5 miles away. I started walking, the rhythm of my heels on the pavement serving as a metronome for my memories. To understand why a father would hand his daughter a bill for her existence, you have to understand the economy of the Blake household. From the outside, we were the postcard for the American dream in Raleigh. We had the colonial brick house with the white pillars, the lawn that looked like it was manicured with nail scissors, and the annual Christmas party that people spent months trying to get invited to. But inside those walls, we did not operate on love. We operated on a ledger system. My father, Gordon, did not see people. He saw assets and liabilities. To him, a relationship was a contract. If he invested time or money in you, he expected a return. It was never spoken aloud. Of course, it was coded in the language of disappointment and approval. A good report card was not a reason for a hug. It was proof that his investment in private tutoring was yielding results. A mistake was not a learning opportunity. It was a depreciation of value. My mother, Marianne, was the compliance officer of this emotional corporation. Her currency was silence. She believed that if a problem was not spoken, it did not exist. If Gordon was angry, she would smooth the air with casseroles and forced smiles, terrified of any ripple in the surface of our perfect life. She taught us that peace was not the absence of conflict, but the suppression of truth. And then there was Haley. Haley was 4 years younger than me, and she had figured out the game before she could even tie her shoes. She treated being a daughter like a full-time career. She knew exactly how to tilt her head when Gordon was speaking to make him feel wise. She knew exactly when to laugh at his repetitive jokes. She understood that in the Blake economy, being decorative was the highest form of value. She was the golden retriever who brought the slippers. I was the working dog who guarded the perimeter but wasn't allowed on the furniture. As I walked past the darkened windows of my neighbors, I thought about the family photos that lined the hallway I had just left. If a stranger looked at them closely, they would see the story I had tried to ignore for decades. Haley was the center of every frame. Haley blowing out candles. Haley in her prom dress, beaming. Haley holding a trophy. The lighting always seemed to catch her hair just right. And me, I was there, but I was incidental. I was the blur in the background holding the extra coats. I was the one looking away from the camera because I was checking to see if the oven was on. In the few portraits where we were posed together, Gordon's hand was always resting proudly on Haley's shoulder. I was usually standing a foot apart, hands clasped, looking like a visiting cousin who wasn't quite sure if she belonged in the shot. I was not the prized pony. I was the farmhand. I was the one who set up the Wi-Fi routers because Gordon refused to read the manual. I was the one who spent hours on the phone with the cable company negotiating lower rates for the house I didn't own. When Aunt Diane needed someone to drive her to her chemotherapy appointments because Uncle Ray was working, I was the one who took the days off. When Cousin Mike got arrested for a DUI in college, I was the one who found the lawyer and handled the paperwork so Gordon wouldn't have to face the shame of it. They never said thank you, not once. Because you do not thank a light switch for turning on. You only notice it when it breaks. That was why I chose my career. That was why I chose my apartment. I lived alone because solitude was the only place where I didn't feel like I was auditioning for approval. I decorated my apartment with things I bought with my own money, secondhand furniture and books, because I needed to know that no one could come in and repossess my sofa because I hadn't smiled enough that week. I went to work at Stonehaven DataWorks, not because I loved computers, but because I loved rules that didn't change. My job was in compliance and access control. I audited systems. I checked logs. I made sure that the people who were trying to get into the server room were the people who were actually authorized to be there. In the corporate world, there is a paper trail for everything. If someone deletes a file, there is a record. If someone changes a number in a spreadsheet, there is a timestamp. It was comforting. It was fair. It was the opposite of my childhood, where the rules changed depending on Gordon's mood and Marianne's denial. But as I crossed the intersection, waiting for a lone truck to pass, my mind drifted to the one time the lines between my professional skills and my family obligations had blurred. It was about 5 years ago. I was 27. Gordon had called me over on a Sunday, not for dinner, but because his laptop was acting up. He was trying to manage a spreadsheet for what he called the Blake Family Trust. He had been frustrated, slamming the mouse against the desk. "Fix it, Scarlett," he had snapped, standing up to pour himself a scotch. "The formulas aren't linking." I sat down at his heavy oak desk. It was a simple fix, a broken reference in an Excel sheet. But as I fixed it, I had to look at the data. I saw names I recognized: Uncle Ray, Aunt Diane, my grandmother, before she passed, Cousin Mike's parents. Beside their names were dates and amounts: $5,000 here, $10,000 there. I scrolled down. The money was being funneled into a central account, and then from there, it was being split. Some went to low-yield bonds, which made sense for a conservative family fund. But there were other outflows, large, round numbers transferring to an LLC I had never heard of. When Gordon came back into the room, I made the mistake of asking a question. "Dad, what is this consulting fee for?" I asked, pointing to a line item that had drained 15% of the quarter's contributions. "And why is Uncle Ray's contribution listed as a charitable donation on this tab?" But as an investment capital entry on the summary page, Gordon had frozen. The ice in his glass clinked once. He walked over, reached down, and shut the laptop lid, nearly catching my fingers. "You are here to fix the computer, Scarlett, not to audit the family," he had said. His voice was low, dangerous. It was the same tone he used when he told me I was too loud, or too clumsy, or too opinionated. He put a hand on my shoulder, squeezing just hard enough to be painful. "Uncle Ray and the others, they don't understand finance like I do," he said, his voice smoothing out into a patronizing purr. "I have to simplify things for them. I tell them what they need to hear so they feel secure. It is complicated. You wouldn't understand the nuance of managing expectations. I had let it go. I was 27, and I was still desperate for him to think I was a good daughter. I convinced myself that he was just being protective, that he was the patriarch carrying the burden of everyone's money. I told myself that simplifying wasn't the same as lying, but the seed had been planted over the years. I noticed other things. I noticed how Gordon would tell Aunt Diane that the market was down to explain why her dividend check was small, while on the same day, he would tell Uncle Ray that the market was booming to get him to invest another $5,000. I realized he wasn't managing a fund. He was managing an audience. I had kept that suspicion buried deep in the back of my mind, locked away in a box labeled, "Do not touch." I didn't want to know. I wanted to believe that my father was just arrogant, not a criminal, but tonight changed everything. The dinner, the dossier, the firing. As I walked the final mile toward my apartment complex, the pieces clicked together with the precision of a well-coded algorithm. Tonight wasn't an emotional outburst. Gordon Blake didn't have emotional outbursts. He had strategies. He didn't fire me from the family because he was mad about the cost of my braces from 1999. He didn't bring Evan Caldwell into our dining room to humiliate me just for sport. He did it because he was afraid. Something must have happened with the money. Maybe the liquidity was drying up. Maybe one of the relatives was asking questions he couldn't answer with a smile and a scotch. He needed a scapegoat. He needed to cut ties with the one person in the family who had the technical skills to look at a ledger and see the truth. He had to discredit me. He had to make me look unstable, irresponsible, and unethical. That way, if I ever opened my mouth about what I saw on his laptop 5 years ago, no one would believe me. I would just be the bitter, disowned daughter who was fired for ethical concerns. I stopped at the gate of my apartment complex. My legs were aching, but my mind was razor sharp. The dinner had been a play. Marianne taking the photo down was Act 1. Haley taking the keys was Act 2. Evan firing me was the climax. They had rehearsed it. They had probably sat at that same table yesterday, laughing, planning exactly when to slide the dossier, exactly when to open the doors. They had scripted my destruction. I looked up at the dark windows of my apartment. I had no job to go to tomorrow. I had no family to call, but I had the dossier. Gordon thought he had given me a bill, but he had forgotten one thing about the daughter he ignored. I was the one who fixed the Wi-Fi. I was the one who recovered the lost passwords. I was the one who knew where the digital bodies were buried because I was the one he asked to dig the holes, assuming I was too stupid to notice the smell. I keyed into my building, the electronic beep sounding like the start of a countdown. They wanted to cut me out. Fine, I would remove myself, but I was going to take the truth with me, and I was going to make sure that by the time I was done, simplifying things would no longer be an option for Gordon Blake. The waiters moved in perfect synchronization, like clockwork automatons designed solely to serve roast beef and glazed carrots without making a sound. They were not family. They were hired staff, likely paid a premium to be invisible. They placed plates down with a soft clink that rippled down the long mahogany table. Wine was poured into crystal glasses, a deep, blood-red Cabernet that shimmered under the chandelier light. It was a masterclass in staging. My father had curated this environment to be impeccable. The napkins were folded into sharp swans. The silverware was polished to a mirror shine. Everything was beautiful, expensive, and completely devoid of life. It was a stage set, and we were the actors who had just received our cues. I sat there, my hands resting on my lap, watching the steam rise from the meat. No one was eating yet. They were waiting for the signal. The 100 guests, my blood relatives, sat with their spines stiff against the high-backed chairs. I looked at their faces. Aunt Diane was staring intently at a floral arrangement, refusing to blink. Cousin Mike was tearing a bread roll into tiny, microscopic pieces, his eyes darting nervously toward the head of the table. They knew something was coming. They didn't know the specifics, perhaps, but they knew the rhythm of Gordon Blake's rage. They knew that a dinner this grand, this formal, and this devoid of joy was never just a meal, it was a tribunal. Then, the performance began in earnest. My mother, Marianne, pushed her chair back, It was the only sound in the room. She stood up, her movements fluid and practiced. She did not look at me. She did not look at anyone. She walked toward the gallery wall, the sacred space where the family history was curated. I watched her reach for my photo. It was a picture from 5 years ago, taken at a cousin's wedding. I was smiling in the photo, a genuine smile, rare for these events. Marianne lifted the frame from its hook. She held it for a brief second, just long enough for everyone to register what she was holding. Then, she placed it face down on the sideboard. She didn't slam it. She didn't throw it. She simply inverted it, erasing my face from the room. The cruelty was in the quiet. It was a symbolic death. I scanned the table. I looked for a flinch. I looked for a furrowed brow. I looked for someone, anyone to ask. "Marianne, what are you doing?" There was nothing. Uncle Ray took a sip of water. My second cousin, Sarah, adjusted her pearl necklace. They had all witnessed the erasure, and they had all collectively decided to edit it out of their perception. This was the cost of admission to the Blake Inner Circle blindness. To remain in good standing, you had to see only what Gordon wanted you to see. If you acknowledged the cruelty, you risked becoming its next target. Gordon cleared his throat. He did not need a microphone. His voice carried the weight of judgment. "We raise our children to be contributors," Gordon began. He wasn't speaking to me. He was speaking to the room. He was the prosecutor delivering his opening statement to the jury. "We invest in them. We nurture them. We provide the soil for them to grow. But there comes a time when a return on that investment is expected. There comes a time for adult responsibility." He tapped the thick dossier that sat between us. He didn't open it again. He treated it like a holy text that contained damning scripture. "Scarlett has chosen to live a life of independence," he said, twisting the word until it sounded like a synonym for treason. "But independence is not free. For 32 years, this family has carried her. We have paid for the roof, the education, the safety. We have kept the ledger." He looked at me then, his eyes cold and flat. "If you cannot honor the debt you have accrued, Scarlett, then we must close the account. We cannot continue to subsidize a liability. If this balance is not settled, we will have no choice but to sever all ties. We will close this chapter, tonight." It was a public ultimatum. Pay a fortune that I did not have, or be orphaned. Before the echo of his words could fade, Haley leaned forward. She placed her elbows on the table, clasping her hands together in a gesture of concern that looked practiced in a mirror. "I just want to help, Scarlett," she said softly. Her voice was sweet, laced with a poisonous kind of pity. "I know this is overwhelming for you. That is why I told Daddy I would take the car. It is one less thing for you to worry about. I can take over the insurance and the maintenance. You shouldn't have to carry that burden when you're struggling." The room seemed to soften toward her. Look at Haley. Their faces said, so gracious, so willing to step in. I felt a sharp, metallic taste in my mouth. The car, my Honda. I had bought it 5 years ago. I remembered the day clearly. I was at the dealership, pen in hand, ready to sign. Gordon had stepped in, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Let me put the title in my name." "Scarlett," he had said. "My insurance rates are significantly lower. You can just pay me the monthly installments. It's smarter math." I had agreed. I had written him a check every single month for 60 months. I had paid for every oil change, every tire rotation, every gallon of gas. I had paid for that car in full. Twice over, if you counted the interest he had likely skimmed. But on paper, legally, it was his. He had set this trap 5 years ago, waiting for a moment when he needed to strip me bare. Haley wasn't helping. She was repossessing property I had already paid for, and she was framing it as an act of charity. "Thank you, Haley," Gordon said solemnly. "That is very generous of you." I almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. They were stealing from me in broad daylight and expecting applause for their benevolence. Then, Gordon looked toward the entrance. And unfortunately, character is not just a domestic issue, it follows us into the world. This was the cue for Evan. My boss, my former boss, stood by the door like a nervous undertaker. He walked into the light of the chandelier. He didn't look at the guests. He looked at the floor, then at Gordon. Evan didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. He spoke with the somber tone of a priest reading a eulogy for a soul that was going to hell. "Stonehaven Data Works values integrity above all else," Evan recited. "We have received credible information regarding a breach of trust, a conflict of interest that compromises our security protocols." He paused, letting the words hang in the conditioned air. "Scarlett, we are terminating your employment effective immediately. Your badge is deactivated. Your clearance is revoked." He didn't offer proof. He didn't mention a specific incident. He didn't have to. In this room, accusation was identical to conviction. I saw Aunt Diane cover her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide. To her, this was the final nail. A father could be harsh. Yes, a mother could be cold. But for a boss to show up at a family dinner to fire someone in their worldview, that only happened if the person had done something truly monstrous. Gordon had calculated this perfectly. He knew that if I was fired via email on a Monday morning, it was just a job loss. But getting fired here, in front of the tribe, it was a moral stain. It suggested that my corruption was so deep, so urgent, that it couldn't wait until business hours. Gordon looked around the room again. He was collecting their fear. He was harvesting their compliance. He needed them to witness this so that tomorrow, when people asked why Scarlett wasn't at the reunion, or why Scarlett wasn't in the Christmas card, they would remember this moment. They would remember the dossier. They would remember the car keys. They would remember the grim face of my manager. They would tell themselves Gordon had no choice. She was out of control. She owed them money. She was fired for unethical behavior. He did the hard thing to protect the family. Gordon was building a memory palace where he was the hero and I was the villain, and he was cementing the bricks with every second of silence. All eyes turned to me. I could feel the pressure of their gaze physically, like the heat from a fire. They wanted a reaction. They craved it. If I screamed I paid for that car, I would look like a hysterical child fighting over a toy. If I yelled, "He's lying about the money," I would look defensive and ungrateful. If I cried, I would look guilty. Gordon was waiting for me to explode. He had his rebuttals ready. He had his "calm down, honey" prepared. He wanted to wrestle in the mud because he owned the mud. I looked at the roast beef, congealing on the china. I looked at the wine, untouched. I looked at Haley, twirling my keys. I looked at Evan, who was sweating through his suit. I realized then that this wasn't a family dinner. It was a courtroom where the verdict had been written before the trial began. There was no defense attorney. There was no appeal process. So, I chose the only option that wasn't in their script. I stood up. I moved my chair back slowly, ensuring it didn't scrape against the floor. I picked up my purse. I smoothed the fabric of my skirt. I looked directly at Gordon. I didn't glare. I didn't frown. I looked at him with the neutral, professional expression I used when auditing a server log. I looked at him as if he were a line of corrupt code that I had just identified. He blinked. He shifted in his seat. This wasn't the reaction he wanted. He wanted a daughter's pain. I gave him a stranger's assessment. I turned my back on him. I walked past the table. I walked past the cousins who were holding their breath. I walked past the empty space on the wall where my face used to be. The silence behind me was deafening. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that covered them, not me. As I reached the door, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't the crushing weight of heartbreak I had expected. It wasn't the stinging acid of shame. It was lightness. For 32 years, I had been trying to buy a ticket to a show that didn't want me. I had been paying dues to a club that hated me. I had been trying to earn the love of people who only loved leverage. Gordon had just revoked my membership. He thought he was banishing me to the wilderness. He thought he was taking everything away from me. He was wrong. By taking away the hope of their approval, he had inadvertently broken the chains. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to smile at insults. I didn't have to write checks for cars I didn't own. I didn't have to cover up their secrets. I opened the front door. The humid night air rushed in, smelling of rain and asphalt, so much cleaner than the conditioned, Sterile air of the dining room. I stepped out. I was unemployed. I was supposedly in debt. I was disowned. But as the door clicked shut, cutting off the view of the 100 witnesses, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a prosecutor who had just finished gathering the final piece of evidence. They had wanted a show. I would give them a war. But not tonight. Tonight, I walked away. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't walking away from them. I was walking toward myself. I did not call a taxi. I did not call a friend. I did not reach for my phone to dial the 1 or 2 people in my life who might have offered a sympathetic ear. To do so would have required speaking. And I did not trust my voice to remain steady. I did not want to turn this tragedy into a sob story for someone else to consume. I chose to walk. My apartment was nearly 5 miles from my parents' estate. In the humidity of a North Carolina summer, walking that distance in 3-inch heels and a cocktail dress was an act of physical masochism, but I welcomed the discomfort. I needed the physical sensation of the pavement beneath my feet to remind me that I was still tethered to the earth. I needed the dull ache in my arches to distract me from the hollowed-out feeling in my chest. The suburbs of Raleigh were quiet at this hour. It was a manufactured silence, heavy with the scent of freshly cut grass and chemical fertilizer. I walked past row after row of houses that mirrored the one I had just been exiled from. Grand colonial revivals, brick facades, perfectly symmetrical shrubbery. But as I walked, I began to see things I had never noticed from behind the window of a car. I saw the blue flicker of a television set through a living room window, where a couple sat close together on a sofa, their feet tangled under a blanket. I saw a kitchen island bathed in warm yellow light, where a woman was laughing as she wiped down a counter, a man leaning against the refrigerator holding a glass of milk. I heard the rhythmic shh-shh of a sprinkler system engaging 3 lawns over, a sound that usually annoyed me but now sounded like the heartbeat of a normal life. I watched these vignettes of domesticity like a ghost passing through a world she could not touch. For 32 years, I had assumed that what happened inside the Blake house was normal. I thought every family held board meetings disguised as dinners. I thought every father tracked the cost of his children's clothing in a spreadsheet. I thought every mother curated her affection based on how well her children performed in public. Seeing that woman laugh in her kitchen, completely unconcerned with who was watching, broke something inside me. It wasn't envy. It was the crushing realization of how much energy I had wasted trying to replicate a warmth that simply did not exist in my bloodline. I had been trying to grow orchids in a freezer. By the time I reached my apartment complex, my feet were blistered and my hair was damp with sweat. But my mind was crystallizing. The fog of shock was lifting, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. I unlocked my door and stepped into the darkness. I did not turn on the lights. I didn't want to see my reflection. I didn't want to see the emptiness of my own living room. I navigated by memory, the layout of my small sanctuary etched into my mind. I walked to the dining table, a simple, round piece of furniture I had bought from a thrift store, and placed the thick dossier down. It landed with a heavy thud. The statement of financial liability. I stared at the shadow of it in the gloom. It was meant to be my tombstone. Gordon intended for me to look at those numbers, panic, and come crawling back to beg for a payment plan. He wanted me to mortgage my future to pay for my past. I turned away from it. I went to my desk in the corner of the room. I sat down and opened my laptop. The screen came to life, casting a harsh, clinical blue glow over my face. This was my space. This was my language. In the real world, I was awkward, unspoken, and easily overpowered by the charismatic force of my family. But here, in the binary world of data and directories, I was a predator. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of dust and ozone. I set a rule for myself right then and there. I would not break the law. I would not hack into Gordon's bank accounts. I would not guess his passwords. Even though I probably knew them, he used variations of his own birthday and the word success. I would not breach the servers of Stonehaven DataWorks to delete the logs they had likely fabricated. If I did those things, I became the criminal they claimed I was. If I acted out of malice, I validated their narrative. I would only use what I already had. I would only access the information that had been voluntarily given to me over the years. I would use the digital breadcrumbs they had been too arrogant to sweep up. I opened my personal email archive. For the last decade, I had been the unofficial tech support for the entire extended Blake clan. Aunt Diane didn't know how to convert a Word document to a PDF. So she emailed me the raw files. Uncle Ray didn't know how to print his bank statements for his tax accountant. So he forwarded the digital copies to me and asked me to bring hard copies to Sunday brunch. Gordon, in his supreme confidence, had often emailed me spreadsheets to clean up the formatting, assuming I was too dull to understand the content. I typed the name Gordon into the search bar. Thousands of results populated the screen. I typed the name Haley, hundreds more. I typed the phrase family trust. 57 results. I began to download. I wasn't reading yet. I was harvesting. I created a secure, encrypted volume on my hard drive, a digital vault where I could piece together the puzzle. My phone, lying face down on the desk, began to buzz. The vibration rattled against the wood. A jarring, aggressive sound in the quiet room. I looked at the screen. Mom. I let it ring. It stopped, then started again immediately. Haley. Then a text message arrived. The screen lit up with the preview. Don't be dramatic. Scarlett, pick up the phone. We are worried about you. Worried. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. They weren't worried about my safety. They were worried about my silence. They were worried that the script had ended and I hadn't read my final line. They expected me to be calling them, sobbing, apologizing, asking how I could make it right. I reached out and turned the phone over, placing it face down again. I did not block them. That would be an emotional reaction. I simply removed their access to me. I turned back to the laptop. I opened the first folder I had compiled, labeled Tax Documents, Uncle Ray. I opened a second window and pulled up a spreadsheet Gordon had sent me 3 years ago titled Trust Distribution 2021. I started to compare the dates. My eyes scanned the rows and columns. This was where I lived. Patterns, anomalies, discrepancies. Most people saw numbers as static values. I saw them as behavior. Money leaves a trail, and that trail tells a story of intent. I saw a transfer of $5,000 from Uncle Ray listed on his bank statement as capital investment. Blake Trust. The date was June 12th. I looked at Gordon's spreadsheet for June 12th. There was no entry for $5,000. There was, however, an entry for administrative fees on June 14th for the amount of $2,000 and a miscellaneous expense for $3,000 paid to a vendor listed as G.B. Consulting, G.B. Gordon Blake. He was taking the money, washing it through a shell company fee, and never putting it into the principal investment. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This wasn't just simplifying things for the relatives. This was embezzlement. I kept digging. I opened an email from Aunt Diane. It contained a scanned image of a check she had written for college fund. Haley. She had sent it to me asking if the font looked weird because her printer was jamming. I looked at the deposit records Gordon had asked me to reconcile that same year. The check from Aunt Diane had been deposited, but not into a college fund. It had been deposited into an account ending in 449. I searched my memory. What was account 449? I went to my own banking history. I searched for the transfers I had made for the car payments, the car that Haley was now driving. I found the recipient account number, 449. It was Gordon's personal operational account, the account he used to pay for his golf club membership, his landscapers, and his wine cellar. Aunt Diane wasn't paying for Haley's education. She was paying for Gordon's lifestyle. And I had been paying for a car that was technically funding his greens fees. The pain in my chest began to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. It was a useful anger. It was fuel. For years, I had thought I was the defect. I thought I was the one who didn't fit because I wasn't charming enough, or pretty enough, or successful enough. I had spent my entire adult life waiting for them to love me, thinking that if I just worked harder, fixed enough computers, and stayed quiet enough, They would finally see me, but they had seen me all along. They saw me as a resource. They saw me as a quiet, competent utility that could be used to facilitate their fraud. They didn't hate me, they just didn't care about me. And in a way, that was more liberating. You cannot negotiate with people who do not value you as a human being. You can only expose them. I looked at the phone again. It was still buzzing periodically. They were getting desperate. They weren't afraid that I was hurt. They weren't afraid that I was sad. They were afraid because I had walked out of that room with the dossier, and I hadn't said a word. They knew, deep down, what I was capable of. They knew that I was the one who knew where the files were stored. I opened a new document. I named it The Real Ledger. I wasn't going to sue them, not yet. I wasn't going to scream at them on Facebook. I was going to audit them. I typed the first entry, June 12, 2021. Uncle Ray, $5,000, misappropriated. I looked at the screen, my eyes tracing the lines of data. A distinct pattern was emerging. It wasn't just random theft. It was a systemic siphoning of wealth from the extended family, designed to prop up the illusion of Gordon and Marianne's success. And the most damning part, the metadata on the files Gordon had sent me showed that he had edited them. He had manually changed the numbers before sending them to me for formatting. He had left his digital fingerprints on the murder weapon and then handed it to me to polish. I leaned back in my chair, the darkness of the apartment wrapping around me. I was alone. I was broke. I was the black sheep. But as I stared at the glowing screen, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a person who realizes that the monster under the bed is just a man in a cheap suit, and she happens to hold the flashlight. I cracked my knuckles. I had a lot of work to do. The glow of the laptop screen was the only light in my apartment. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. My eyes felt gritty, as if sand had been rubbed into them, but my mind was operating at a frequency I had not felt in years. I was no longer the daughter sitting in the chair of the accused. I was the auditor, and I had just opened the books. I started by building a timeline. In my line of work at Stonehaven DataWorks, we called this establishing the baseline. To understand the anomaly, you first have to understand the routine. I pulled up the scattered records I had harvested from my email archives, the forwarded bank statements from Uncle Ray, the investment updates Aunt Diane had asked me to print, the tax documents Cousin Mike had sent me in a panic 3 years ago. I opened a fresh spreadsheet and began to manually input every single transaction date and amount. It was tedious work, the kind that makes your shoulders ache and your vision blur, but I did not stop. Row 1, October 12th, 2018. Uncle Ray transfers $5,000. Row 2, November 1st, 2018. Aunt Diane transfers $10,000. Row 3, December 15th, 2018. Grandmother's estate transfers $20,000. I worked through the night, compiling 5 years of data. When I finally sat back and looked at the visualization I had created, the pattern was not just clear, it was glaring. The money came in like clockwork. My relatives believed they were contributing to a Blake Family Growth Fund, a private investment vehicle my father claimed he was managing to secure generational wealth. They sent money when they got bonuses. They sent money when they sold property. They sent money because they trusted Gordon Blake, the patriarch who lived in the big house on the hill. I traced the inflow. It all went into a central account, the one ending in 449. Then, I traced the outflow. If this were a legitimate fund, the money should have moved from account 449 into brokerage accounts, index funds, or real estate holdings. It should have sat there, accumulating interest and dividends. But it didn't. The money hit the 449 account, sat there for maybe 48 hours, and then vanished into a web of wire transfers. I followed the largest streams first. There were recurring monthly transfers to an entity listed simply as HB Lifestyle Management. The amounts were inconsistent but always significant. $4,000 here, $6,000 there. I did a quick cross-reference with the dates. On June 14, 2022, HB Lifestyle Management received a transfer of $8,500. I opened a new tab and went to Instagram. I typed in my sister's handle. I scrolled back through her feed, past the curated selfies and the motivational quotes about hustling. I found the post from June 16th, 2022. It was a photo of Haley standing on a balcony in Tulum, Mexico, holding a coconut. The caption read, "Manifesting abundance. Blessed entrepreneur self-made." I checked the tagged location. It was a luxury eco-resort where the nightly rate was roughly $1,200. I went back to the spreadsheet. August 3rd. A transfer of $4,000 to a vendor called Lux PR Group. August 5th. Haley posts a professional photo shoot of herself in a downtown studio, claiming she was featured in a local style magazine. I felt a wave of nausea roll through me. Haley wasn't a successful influencer. She wasn't a brand ambassador. She was a leech. Her entire career, her entire persona of being the golden child who knew how to present herself, was being directly funded by Uncle Ray's retirement savings and Aunt Diane's widow benefits. My father wasn't just indulging her, he was stealing from his own siblings to finance her vanity. But that was just simple greed. What I found next was something far more dangerous. I noticed a series of transfers going to a company called Apex Strategic Consulting. These weren't small lifestyle purchases. These were massive, irregular chunks. $15,000, $22,000. I had never heard of Apex Strategic Consulting. I searched the corporate registry database, a public tool. Perfectly legal to access. I found the filing. It was a shell company registered in Delaware to a registered agent. It had no website, no LinkedIn page, no employees. But I had the invoices. Gordon had been sloppy. In a folder of tax prep files he had sent me last year, asking me to organize them for the accountant, he had included a PDF folder labeled Expenses. I opened it. I found an invoice from Apex Strategic Consulting for retainer fees. I scrolled down to the bottom of the invoice to see who had authorized the payment. Usually, Gordon signed everything with his flamboyant, looping signature. But this line didn't have Gordon's signature. It had a digital signature block. Authorized by S. Davis, Compliance Officer. I stopped breathing. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. That was my name. That was my job title. And looking at the digital scrawl, it looked exactly like the signature I used on my driver's license and my work documents. I stared at the screen until the pixels seemed to burn into my retinas. I had never heard of Apex Strategic Consulting. I had never authorized a payment for them. I had never signed this document. Gordon hadn't just used me to fix the Wi-Fi. He had lifted my signature probably from a birthday card or one of the many mundane forms I had signed for him over the years, and he had digitized it. He was using my identity to rubber stamp the diversion of funds into this black hole company. The cold realization washed over me. If the IRS audited the family fund, or if Uncle Ray finally demanded to see the books, Gordon wouldn't be the one holding the smoking gun. I would be, "Look," he would say, "I didn't know where the money went. Scarlett was the compliance officer. Scarlett handled the books. Scarlett authorized the transfers to this shell company. That was why Evan had fired me for ethical concerns. That was why they needed to establish a public narrative that I was untrustworthy. They were building the frame. They weren't just kicking me out of the family. They were preparing to send me to federal prison to cover their tracks." I forced myself to remain calm. Panic was a luxury I could not afford. I needed proof that I hadn't signed this. I checked the metadata of the PDF invoice. Created February 10th, 2023. Time 10:14 in the morning. Modified February 10th, 2023. Time 10:20 in the morning. I grabbed my phone and opened my old work calendar, which was still synced to my personal cloud. February 10th, 2023. At 10:14 in the morning, I was not sitting at a computer authorizing fraudulent wire transfers. I was in a mandatory cybersecurity awareness training seminar at Stonehaven DataWorks. I had checked in with my badge. There would be a physical log of my location. There would be witnesses. Gordon was arrogant. He thought that because he controlled the narrative at the dinner table, he controlled reality. But he didn't understand that digital reality leaves footprints that cannot be shouted down. I dug deeper. I needed to know how long this had been going on. I searched my email again, this time looking for the word authorize or sign. I found an email from Uncle Ray, dated 4 years ago. The subject line was, "Just checking in. Hi, Scarlett." The email read, "Your dad mentioned that you would be handling the sign-off for the new allocation strategy in the system. I know you are busy with your big city job, so no rush. Just wanted to make sure you got the paperwork he mentioned." I remembered this email. At the time, I had been confused. I had replied, "Uncle Ray, I think Dad is confused. I don't manage the fund." Ray had never replied. Gordon must have intercepted him, smoothed it over, told him I was just being modest, or that I was handling it on the back end. Gordon had been planting the seeds of my culpability for years. He had been telling the relatives that I was the one pulling the levers. That way, when the money ran out, the anger wouldn't be directed at the benevolent patriarch. It would be directed at the distant, cold, tech-savvy daughter who didn't care about family. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. But it wasn't from sadness. It was from the sheer, icy shock of betrayal. A father protecting himself is one thing. A father actively designing a trap to destroy his daughter to save his own skin is a level of sociopathy I hadn't let myself believe existed. I wiped the tear away. I had to secure this. I reached into my bag and pulled out an external hard drive. I didn't just copy the files. I used a forensic imaging tool I had on my laptop. I created a hash of every single file, a digital fingerprint that proved the file hadn't been altered since I downloaded it. I created a chain of custody log. I saved the timeline. I saved the invoices with the forged signatures. I saved the metadata reports showing the discrepancies in the creation times. As I was organizing the files, I clicked back to the dossier Gordon had given me tonight, the Statement of Financial Liability. I looked at the number again, $312,480. Then I looked at my spreadsheet, at the column summing up the withdrawals labeled GB Personal and Apex. The total amount diverted from the relatives over the last 5 years was $340,000. The numbers were almost identical. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the gut. The money Gordon had spent raising me, the money he claimed was his generous sacrifice, wasn't his money. He had been stealing from the family for decades. He had taken money from Aunt Diane, from Uncle Ray, from the grandmother's estate, and he used it to pay for the lifestyle that included my braces, my field trips, and Haley's car. And now, he was presenting me with a bill for it. He was trying to get me to pay him back $300,000 that he had stolen from someone else. It was the ultimate money laundering scheme. If I paid him, he could plug the hole in the fund before anyone noticed. He was trying to use my guilt to balance his ledger. I sat back in my chair. The sun was starting to rise outside my window, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gray. The dinner hadn't been a punishment. It had been a desperate, tactical maneuver. Gordon was running out of liquidity. The relatives were maybe asking for withdrawals he couldn't cover. He needed a cash injection, or he needed a culprit. He had tried to get both from me tonight. He thought he had closed the door on me. He thought he had cut me off, but in his haste to push me out, he had forgotten that I was the only one who knew how to read the map. He hadn't just given me a reason to fight back. He had given me the blueprints to his own destruction. I looked at the external hard drive, the little light blinking rhythmically. It contained the end of Gordon Blake. It contained the end of Haley's career. It contained the truth that would shatter the peace of 100 people. I wasn't going to release it yet. You don't fire a weapon until you have a clear shot. I needed to clear my name at Stonehaven first. I needed to dismantle the lie about my ethics. And then, I was going to turn my attention to the family. I closed the laptop. The screen went black. I wasn't tired anymore. I was ready. The sun was fully up now, casting hard, unforgiving beams of light across my living room floor. I had not slept. My eyes were burning, but my mind felt like it had been submerged in ice water, awake, alert, and dangerously clear. I looked at my phone. It had been vibrating intermittently for the last hour, dancing across the wooden surface of my desk. It wasn't my family this time. Evan Caldwell. 7 missed calls. 12 text messages. I picked up the device and scrolled through the previews without unlocking the screen. The evolution of his panic was documented in timestamps. 8:03 in the morning, Scarlett. Please pick up. We need to talk before you do anything. 8:15 in the morning, I didn't have a choice last night. Your father is a very persuasive man. He threatened to pull the Stonehaven account. 8:30 in the morning, can we meet for coffee? Just us? Off the record. I can fix this if we just talk. 8:45 in the morning, please don't call HR yet. Let me explain. I stared at the messages. Evan was trying to treat this like an interpersonal conflict, a misunderstanding between friends that could be smoothed over with a latte and an apology. He was operating under the assumption that I was still the Scarlett he knew, the quiet, compliant employee who avoided conflict at all costs. He was wrong. The Scarlett he knew had died the moment he stood up at that dinner table and read my execution order to an audience of strangers. I did not reply. I did not call him back. In the corporate world, an off-the-record conversation is just a way for the guilty party to manipulate the narrative without leaving a paper trail. I was done with verbal agreements. I was done with trust me. I opened my laptop. I didn't try to log into my work email. I knew my credentials had been revoked. Instead, I opened a private browser window and navigated to the Stonehaven DataWorks corporate directory, which was publicly cached. I wasn't going to call the local HR representative in our Raleigh office. That person reported to the branch manager, who played golf with Evan. That was a closed loop. I searched for Regional Director of People Operations, East Coast. I found a name, Veronica Miller, based in Atlanta. I picked up my phone and dialed the number. It rang 3 times. Stonehaven Compliance. Veronica Miller speaking. A voice answered. It was crisp, professional, and completely detached. Perfect. Good morning, Miss Miller, I said. My voice was steady. My name is Scarlett Davis. I am, or I was, as of 12 hours ago, a senior compliance analyst at the Raleigh branch. My employee ID is 4922 Alpha. I am calling to report a procedural violation regarding my termination and to request an immediate hold on any processing of my exit paperwork. There was a pause on the other end. The sound of typing stopped. Ms. Davis, she said, her tone shifting from polite to cautious. I see your file here. It is flagged as terminated for cause effective yesterday evening. If you wish to appeal. I am not calling to appeal based on emotion. I cut in. I am calling to report a liability. I was terminated at 7:30 in the evening on a Sunday, at a private residence, during a family birthday party. My direct manager, Evan Caldwell, arrived at the venue, which is my father's home, and announced my firing in front of 100 non-employee witnesses. There was no human resources representative present. I have never received a performance improvement plan. I have never had a disciplinary hearing. I was not given a written notice of termination, only a verbal declaration in a social setting. The silence on the other end stretched out. In the world of corporate human resources, what I had just described was the equivalent of a nuclear bomb. It was a lawsuit wrapped in a nightmare, tied with a bow of public relations disaster. He fired you at a birthday party? Veronica asked. The professional veneer cracked just slightly. Yes, I said. He cited ethical concerns in front of my extended family. This constitutes defamation of character and a hostile breach of privacy. Furthermore, Mr. Caldwell has sent me 12 text messages this morning admitting that he acted under duress from a third party specifically. My father and is now asking to meet me off the record. To fix it, I can provide screenshots of these communications. Do not meet him, Veronica said immediately. Her voice was sharp now. The liability alarms were ringing in her head. Do not speak to Mr. Caldwell. I have no intention of doing so, I said. I am formally requesting that you preserve all access logs for my account from the last 48 hours. I want a chain of command audit to see who authorized this termination in the system, because I suspect Mr. Caldwell bypassed standard approval protocols to placate a client, my father. I need you to send me a written statement immediately, Veronica said. Keep it brief. Facts only. Times, locations, names of witnesses. Attach the screenshots of the text messages. Send it to my direct email. I am opening a case number right now. I will have it to you in 10 minutes, I said. Scarlett, she added, before I could hang up. Sit tight. Do not post anything on social media. We are going to freeze this action until we can verify the procedural integrity. Understood. I hung up. I spent the next 9 minutes typing. I didn't write a novel. I wrote an affidavit. At 7:15 in the evening. I arrived at the Blake residence. At 7:45 in the evening. Evan Caldwell entered the premises. At 7:48 in the evening. Evan Caldwell verbally terminated my employment. Witnesses included Gordon Blake, Marianne Blake, and approximately 98 other guests. I attached the screenshots of Evan's texts, highlighting the one where he admitted, "Your father is a very persuasive man." I hit send. Then, I went to the kitchen and made coffee. I watched the steam rise from the mug. My hands were not shaking. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were piloting a machine rather than inhabiting a body. 30 minutes passed. My phone rang. It was an Atlanta area code. Ms. Davis? Veronica's voice was different this time. It was the voice of someone who had just yelled at a lot of people and was now trying to clean up the mess. I have reviewed your statement and the evidence provided. I have also spoken with the Raleigh branch leadership. She took a breath. Effective immediately. Your termination has been rescinded pending a full internal investigation. It appears that proper protocol was severely neglected. Mr. Caldwell acted unilaterally and without the required authorization from the legal department. I took a sip of coffee. I see. Mr. Caldwell has been placed on administrative leave while we conduct this review, she continued. He has been instructed to have no contact with you. If he attempts to reach you, you are to notify me immediately. Thank you. Veronica. Your network access is being restored as we speak. You are not expected to report to the physical office today. Take the day as paid administrative time. We will need to schedule a formal interview tomorrow. I appreciate that, I said. I was about to hang up. Feeling the first rush of victory, I had done it. I had reversed the irreversible. I had stripped Gordon of his victory before he even finished his morning toast. One more thing. Ms. Davis, Veronica said. Her tone dropped an octave. It became quieter, more serious. Yes. In the termination note that Mr. Caldwell attempted to file late last night after the event, he listed the specific cause for dismissal. I frowned. He told me it was general ethical concerns. The file specifies an incident, Veronica said. He claims that you were involved in an unauthorized exfiltration of sensitive internal data. He claims there was a leak regarding the Blake Trust portfolio, and that you used your system access to obtain private financial records belonging to a client, your father. The coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. A cold chill, sharper than the one in the dining room, shot down my spine. A leak, I repeated. Yes, the allegation is that you stole data. Obviously, given the context of the forced firing, we are viewing this with extreme skepticism. But I have to ask, did you access any files related to Gordon Blake or his assets using company resources? My mind raced. This was the trap. Gordon hadn't just wanted me fired. He knew I was a compliance officer. He knew I would fight a procedural firing. He knew I would call HR. He wanted a record. He wanted an official corporate record stating that Scarlett Davis stole financial data. Why? Because he knew I had the dossier. He knew or suspected that I had figured out his embezzlement. He was preemptively discrediting me. If I went to the police tomorrow and said, "My father is stealing from the family," he could pull up this Stonehaven investigation and say, "She didn't find that. She stole it. She is a disgruntled employee who hacked my files. This is fruit of the poisonous tree. She is a criminal, not a whistleblower." He was trying to criminalize the truth before I could speak it. Ms. Davis, Veronica asked, "Are you there?" "I am here," I said. My voice was calm, but my knuckles were white around the ceramic mug. I can categorically deny that I have ever used Stonehaven resources to access client data unauthorized. My job is to prevent unauthorized access. If there was a leak, it didn't come from me, and I welcome a full audit of my logs to prove it. Good, Veronica said. That is what I wanted to hear. We will run the forensics. If your logs are clean, then this allegation will be treated as further evidence of Mr. Caldwell's misconduct. The logs will be clean, I said, and they would be. I hadn't used my work computer to investigate Gordon until after I was fired, and even then, I had only used my personal laptop and personal email archives. I had been careful. We will speak tomorrow, Ms. Davis, Veronica said. Try to rest. The line went dead. I lowered the phone. I walked back to my laptop. The screen was still displaying the spreadsheet I had built, the timeline of theft. Gordon played dirty. He played really dirty. He was willing to destroy my professional reputation, mark me as a corporate spy, and potentially expose me to federal hacking charges, just to keep his secret safe. He didn't just want me out of the family. He wanted me unemployable. He wanted me to be a pariah so that when I spoke, no one would listen. I looked at the text messages from Evan again. Your father is a very persuasive man. Evan was just a pawn. He was a weak man who got caught in the gravity of a narcissist. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I sat down at the desk. My job was safe. For now. Evan was neutralized. For now. But the war had shifted. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about credibility. Gordon had fired the first shot in the battle for the narrative. He had accused me of being a thief. I looked at the external hard drive where I had stored the evidence. If he wanted to accuse me of being a data thief, I would have to be very, very careful about how I used this data. I couldn't just dump it on the internet. He had laid a trap for exactly that. I had to be smarter. I had to find a way to make the truth come out without it looking like I was the one holding the smoking gun. I needed allies, and I needed to make sure that when the house of cards fell, it fell because of the weight of its own lies. Not because I pushed it. I closed the browser window. I wasn't the victim anymore. I wasn't the daughter crying in the driveway. I was the senior compliance analyst, and I had just been handed a very complex case to solve. I picked up my phone and opened the contacts list. I scrolled past Mom. I scrolled past Dad. I scrolled past Haley. I stopped at a name I hadn't called in 6 months. Uncle Ray. He was the first victim in my spreadsheet. $5,000. If Gordon wanted to play games with client data, maybe it was time for the clients to start asking their own questions. I didn't call him yet. It was too early. I needed to let the silence sit for a while. I needed Gordon to think his plan had worked. I needed him to think I was scrambling, crying, begging Evan for my job back. I wanted him to feel safe, because men like Gordon Blake are only sloppy when they feel safe. I stood up and walked to the window. The world outside looked the same as it had yesterday, but everything had changed. I checked my bank account. I had enough savings to last 3 months. I checked my email. A notification from Stonehaven IT popped up. Your account access has been restored. I smiled. A cold, thin smile. Round 1 to Scarlet. But the main event was just beginning. The knock on my door came at 11 in the morning. It was not the polite, rhythmic rap of a delivery driver, nor was it the tentative knock of a neighbor asking to borrow sugar. It was a heavy, insistent pounding that shook the frame of the door. It sounded like entitlement. I was sitting at my kitchen table, a fresh cup of coffee in my hand, watching the steam rise in the sunlight. I knew exactly who was on the other side of that wood. I had been expecting them since I hung up the phone with Veronica Miller. When a predator realizes the trap has failed to snap shut, they do not run away. They come back to inspect the mechanism. I walked to the door. I checked the peephole. Gordon Blake stood in the hallway. The fluorescent light of the corridor was unflattering to him. Last night, under the crystal chandelier of his dining room, he had looked like a titan of industry. Here, stripped of his stage and his audience, he looked older. His skin was gray. His shoulders were hunched, and he was sweating. Behind him stood Marianne. She was wearing sunglasses indoors. Her lips were pressed into a thin, white line. I unlocked the deadbolt. The sound of the metal sliding back was loud in the quiet apartment. I opened the door. I did not invite them in. Gordon didn't wait for an invitation. He pushed past me, forcing me to step back or be trampled. He walked into the center of my living room and spun around, his eyes darting to my laptop on the desk, then to the stack of paper by the printer, then finally to me. Marianne followed him, closing the door softly behind her. She leaned against it, crossing her arms, blocking my exit. "You called Stonehaven," Gordon said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "I called the Human Resources Department of my employer." I corrected him. I stayed near the kitchen island, keeping a physical barrier between us. "I reported a procedural error. It is standard protocol." "You humiliated Evan," Gordon spat. "The man is a wreck. He called me in a panic. He says he is being investigated. Do you have any idea what you have done to his career?" Evan destroyed his own career when he decided to fire an employee at a birthday party based on hearsay. I said. My voice was level. "I simply corrected the record." Gordon took a step toward me. He was trying to summon the imposing physical presence he used to intimidate waitstaff and junior associates, but it wasn't working. The air in the room was too thin for his bluster. "We are not here to talk about Evan," Marianne said. Her voice was brittle. She took off her sunglasses, revealing eyes that were red-rimmed but dry. "We are here because we are family, and families do not sue each other. They do not report each other to corporate compliance officers. Families also do not hand their daughters bills for $300,000 and disown them over roast beef," I replied. "That was for your own good," Gordon interrupted, his voice taking on that familiar, condescending tone of a lecture. "We were trying to teach you a lesson about responsibility, about the weight of the world. You have always been so drifted, so unconnected. We wanted to shock you into reality." "You wanted to shock me into silence," I said. Gordon ran a hand through his thinning hair. He paced the small length of my rug. "Look, Scarlett," he said, changing tactics. His voice dropped. He tried to smile, but it looked like a grimace. "We were all emotional last night. It was a high-pressure situation. Maybe we went too far with the car. Maybe the timing with Evan was poor. I admit that. I am big enough to admit that." He looked at me, waiting for me to absolve him. When I didn't, he continued. "But you have to understand the bigger picture, the Blake legacy, the stability of the family, everything I do to keep the ship afloat. Sometimes you have to make hard decisions to keep the lights on." "Is that what you call it?" I asked. "Keeping the lights on." "It is complicated," Gordon said, waving his hand dismissively. "High finance is not black and white. There are liquidity issues. There are bridge loans. It is a delicate ecosystem." My phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at it. A text message from Haley. "Hey sis, I feel terrible about last night. Dad is being intense. I know. Look, I can talk to him. I can get him to sign the car back over to you today. I also know a VP at a marketing firm in Charlotte who owes me a favor. Easy job. Good pay. Let me set it up for you. We just need everyone to calm down." I looked up from the screen to my parents. It was a coordinated assault. Good cop, bad cop, and the briber. Haley was offering me my own property back in exchange for my compliance. She was offering to find me a new job so I wouldn't fight for the old one, the one where I had access to audit logs. "Haley just texted me," I said. Marianne stiffened. "Your sister loves you. She is trying to broker peace. She is offering me a job," I said. "In Charlotte? That is a 2-hour drive from here, a 2-hour drive from Stonehaven, a 2-hour drive from the files." "It is a fresh start," Gordon said eagerly. "A clean slate. You leave this mess behind. You let Evan handle his own problems. You drop the HR complaint. We forget the debt. We wipe the slate clean. $300,000. Gone. Just like that." He snapped his fingers. It was a tempting offer. If you were a person who lacked a spine, he was offering to cancel a fake debt and return a stolen car in exchange for my complicity in his crimes. I took a sip of my coffee. I set the mug down. "Where's the money? Dad?" I asked. The room went dead silent. The air conditioning unit kicked on with a low hum. Gordon blinked. "Excuse me." "Aunt Diane's money," I said. "Uncle Ray's money, the money from Grandma's estate. I have been up all night. Dad, I have been looking at the spreadsheets you sent me over the last 5 years, the ones you asked me to format, the ones where you changed the numbers before you sent them." Gordon's face went from gray to a mottled red. "You have no right to look at those files. That is confidential client information." "It is not client information," I said. "It is family information, and I found the transfers to Apex Strategic Consulting. I found the payments to the shell company that has no website, no employees, and no office." Gordon stopped pacing. He stood very still. His hands curled into fists at his sides. "You are confused," he said. His voice was low, dangerous. "You are looking at raw data without context. Apex is a legitimate advisory firm. They handle risk mitigation. They handle your credit card bills," I said. "And Haley's trips to Mexico, and the catering for the parties where you pretend to be a tycoon." "Stop it," Marianne hissed from the door. "Stop it right now. Scarlett, you do not know what you are talking about. I know that on February 10th of this year, a transfer of $22,000 was authorized to Apex," I said, looking directly at Gordon. "And I know that the signature on that authorization was mine." Gordon flinched. It was small, a micro-expression of shock, but I caught it. "I didn't sign that, Dad," I said softly. "I was in a training seminar. I have the logs to prove it. You forged my signature." Gordon's demeanor shattered. The concerned father mask fell away, revealing the cornered animal underneath. He crossed the room in 2 strides and slammed his hand down on my kitchen island. The coffee mug rattled. "You listen to me," he snarled. He was close enough that I could smell the stale scotch on his breath from the night before. "You are treading on dangerous ground. You think you are smart? You think you can play detective? I have been doing this since before you were born." He leaned in, his eyes wide and manic. "You signed those papers," he said. "I have the physical copies. I have the wet signatures. If you try to say otherwise, it is your word against the documents. And who are they going to believe, the respected wealth manager, or the disgruntled daughter who was just fired for unethical conduct?" "I wasn't fired," I reminded him. "I was reinstated." "For now?" Gordon shouted. "But I will bury you, Scarlett. If you open your mouth to Ray, if you whisper a word to Diane, I will produce those documents. I will hand them to the police myself. I will testify that you were the one skimming the accounts. I will say you used your access to manipulate the funds, and I only just discovered it." "Gordon," Marianne warned, her voice trembling. "No," Gordon yelled, not looking at her. He was fixated on me. "She needs to understand the stakes. I have the paper trail. Scarlett, I made sure of it. I have years of documents with your name on them. You think you found a smoking gun? You found your own death warrant." There it was, the confession. He hadn't just admitted to the theft. He had admitted to the frame-up. He had confirmed that the statement of financial liability wasn't just a prop for the dinner party. It was the opening move in a strategy to pin his felonies on me. He had been planning this for years, collecting my signatures, preparing the forgery, waiting for the day the liquidity ran out so he could throw me to the wolves. I felt a coldness in my stomach, but my face remained impassive. "So that is the plan," I said. "You send me to prison to save your reputation." "I do what I have to do to protect this family," Gordon said, straightening up. He adjusted his suit jacket, regaining a shred of his composure. "You are the one making this difficult. You can take the job in Charlotte. You can take the car. You can walk away. Or you can stay here and be destroyed. It is a simple business decision." "I see," I said. My phone rang again. It wasn't a text. It was a call. The ringtone was loud in the tense room. I looked at the screen. "Uncle Ray." Gordon froze, his eyes locked onto the phone. "Don't answer that," he commanded. I reached for the phone. "Scarlett, do not answer that phone," Marianne pleaded. Stepping forward, I slid the green icon across the screen. I pressed the speaker button. I held the phone up between us. "Hello? Uncle Ray," I said. Gordon held his breath. He looked like a man watching a guillotine blade hover. Ray's voice filled the room. It sounded tinny and distant, but clear. "Scarlett? Honey?" Ray said. He sounded tired. "I am sorry to bother you. I know you must be dealing with a lot after last night." "It's okay, Uncle Ray," I said, watching my father's face. "I am just talking with Mom and Dad right now." Gordon's eyes widened. He shook his head frantically, mouthing the word no. "Oh, are they there?" Ray asked. There was a pause. "Well, that is good. Maybe they can hear this too. I just wanted to call and say, thank you." Gordon looked confused. "Thank you. Thank you?" I asked. "Yes," Ray said. "For years, I have had this feeling, that something wasn't right with the dividends, but Gordon always talks so fast, and he uses those big words, and I didn't want to look stupid. I didn't want to cause trouble." Ray sighed. "But last night, when you stood up, when you walked out of there without saying a word, it made me think, you have always been the smart one. Scarlett, you have always been the honest one. If you were walking away, then I knew something was wrong." Gordon was vibrating with the urge to speak, to interrupt, to shout, but he couldn't. If he spoke, he confirmed he was terrified. "I called the bank this morning. Scarlett," Ray continued, "the one Gordon told me to use, and I asked for the hard copies of the records going back 10 years. I told them I wanted to see everything. They are mailing them to me. I just wanted to thank you for giving me the courage to look." The silence in the apartment was absolute. "You are welcome, Uncle Ray," I said softly. "Let me know when you get them. I can help you read them." "I will," Ray said. "You take care of yourself, kiddo." The line clicked dead. I lowered the phone. Gordon looked as if he had been punched in the gut. His face was pale. The blood drained completely from his cheeks. He had expected Ray to call screaming. He had expected Ray to call demanding I be punished for ruining the dinner. He had relied on Ray's ignorance and Ray's loyalty. But he had forgotten the one thing about people like Uncle Ray. They are quiet, and they are patient, but they are not blind, and they know the difference between arrogance and integrity. "He called the bank," Gordon whispered. It wasn't a sentence. It was a realization of doom. "He called the bank," I repeated. "And since he is the account holder, they will send him the real records, not the spreadsheets you edited, the real ones." Gordon looked at me. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not anger, not disappointment, fear. He realized that his threats about paperwork and signatures were useless against the bank's own records of where the money went. He could forge a signature on an internal invoice, but he couldn't forge the destination of a wire transfer. "You did this," Gordon whispered. "You poisoned him against me." "I didn't say a word to him," I said. "You did. You did it when you treated a dinner table like a courtroom. You showed them who you really are." "Dad, all I did was leave." Gordon looked at Marianne. She was staring at the floor, her hand covering her mouth. She knew. She knew the math. She knew that once Ray saw those papers, the dominoes would fall. Diane would check. Mike would check. The grandmother's estate executors would check. "We have to go," Gordon said. His voice was shaky. "Marianne, we have to go. We have to call the lawyer." He backed toward the door. He didn't look like a titan anymore. He looked like a man trying to outrun an avalanche. "Get out of my apartment," I said. Gordon looked at me one last time. There was no love in his eyes. There was only hatred, the pure, distilled hatred of a man looking at the person who had beaten him. "You will regret this," he hissed. "I already have my regrets," I said. "But they are in the past. Yours are just beginning." He turned and fled into the hallway. Marianne followed him, not looking back. I walked to the door and closed it. I turned the deadbolt. Click. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. They had come here to bury me. They had come here to force me back into the box of the obedient, scapegoated daughter. Instead, they had confirmed everything. They had admitted to the forgery. They had admitted to the plan. And Uncle Ray had lit the match. I pushed off the door and walked back to my laptop. I didn't need to engage with Haley. I didn't need to negotiate for the car. I had work to do. I needed to prepare the analysis for Uncle Ray, because when those bank records arrived, he was going to need a translator to understand exactly how much his brother loved him. I sat down. The family reunion was going to be sooner than they thought. I did not go to social media. That is the mistake of the amateur. In the modern age of revenge, the instinct is to broadcast. The temptation to upload the photos of the dossier to Facebook or to record a tearful TikTok explaining how my father tried to bankrupt me was immense. It would have garnered millions of views. It would have brought me sympathy. Strangers would have commented with heart emojis and angry faces. But sympathy is a volatile currency. It burns fast and leaves nothing but ash. I did not want sympathy. I wanted a conviction. Gordon Blake was not afraid of a scandal. He was a narcissist. And narcissists believe they can talk their way out of any public outcry. He would simply spin it. He would say I was mentally unstable. He would say I was a drug addict. He would say I was lashing out because he cut off my allowance. Gordon Blake was afraid of one thing: the loss of control over the narrative. So, I chose the path of silence. I built a silo around myself and my data. I treated this not as a family squabble, but as a forensic investigation into a criminal enterprise. I started making calls. I did not use the family group chat. That was Gordon's domain. I called them individually, one by one, picking the times when I knew they would be alone. I started with Aunt Diane. Hello? Her voice was tentative. She had likely heard rumors of the incident at the dinner, probably a sanitized version spun by Haley. Aunt Diane, it is Scarlett, I said, keeping my voice professional and calm. I am not calling to complain. I am not calling to badmouth Dad. I am doing some financial restructuring for my own tax purposes. And I found some discrepancies in the files Dad sent me years ago. I just need to verify a date. Oh, she said, sounding relieved that I wasn't screaming. Of course. What date? November 12th, 2019. I said, reading from my spreadsheet. You sent a check for $15,000. Dad listed it in the ledger as maintenance fees. Can you tell me what that money was actually for? There was a long pause. Maintenance fees, Diane asked, her voice confused. No, honey, that was for the scholarship fund. Gordon told me he was setting up a private trust for your cousin Sarah's kids. He said if I put in $15,000, he could leverage it into $50,000 by the time they hit college. I typed into my notes. Lie number 1. Funds designated for education diverted to operational costs. I see, I said. Do you have an email or a letter where he stated that? I think I have the email, she said. He sent me a prospectus. It had a picture of a graduation cap on it. Can you forward that to me? I asked. And Aunt Diane, don't copy Dad on it. I don't want to worry him until I balance the numbers. Okay, she said. Is everything all right? Scarlett. I am just making sure the math works, I said. I moved down the list. I called Cousin Sarah. I called Great Uncle Peters. I called the second cousins in Ohio who only sent checks at Christmas. The pattern was sickening. Gordon was a chameleon. To the elderly relatives, he sold safety and legacy preservation. To the younger cousins, he sold high-yield aggressive growth. To the parents, he sold education. He had tailored the lie to the specific insecurity of each donor. He had looked his own brother in the eye and promised him security, then turned around and used that money to pay for the landscaping at the estate so he could impress the neighbors. By Wednesday afternoon, I had 37 separate confirmations. I had forwarded emails. I had photos of handwritten notes Gordon had sent with Christmas cards. I took all of this chaotic data and I distilled it. I opened a fresh canvas on my laptop. I didn't want a complex spreadsheet that would confuse them. I needed something visual, something undeniable. I created a simple flowchart. On the left, I listed the sources: Uncle Ray Retirement Security, Aunt Diane Sarah's tuition, Cousin Mike Down Payment Fund. In the middle, I drew a black box, account 449. On the right, I listed the actual destination: Haley's Lease, Gordon's Country Club dues, Apex Strategic Consulting, fake, luxury car payments. It was a map of betrayal. It showed that the money wasn't being invested, it was being consumed. But the biggest piece of the puzzle arrived late on Thursday evening. I had asked Aunt Diane if she had any documents related to my grandmother's estate. My grandmother, Martha Blake, had died 10 years ago. She was the matriarch, a stern woman who had built the family fortune through textile mills. Gordon always spoke of her with reverence, claiming he was carrying out her final wishes. "I have the old box in the attic," Diane had told me. "I have the original scan of the will. Gordon has the certified copy, of course, but I kept the draft she sent me before she died. She emailed it to me. I opened the PDF. It was a grainy scan of a typewriter-written document, yellowed at the edges. I read through the legalese. It was standard stuff: assets divided, properties managed. Then I reached Article 7, subsection C. My heart stopped. The Martha Blake Memorial Fund. I read the paragraph 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. I hereby allocate the sum of $50,000 to be placed in a high-yield trust for the sole benefit of my granddaughter, Scarlett Davis, to be accessed upon her 25th birthday. This fund is intended to ensure her independence, as I fear her father's nature is to clip wings rather than build nests. I sat back in my chair. $50,000. My grandmother had left me $50,000. She had seen Gordon for who he was, a man who controlled people by making them dependent. She had tried to give me an escape hatch. I was 32. I had never seen a dime of that money. I checked the dates. On my 25th birthday, Gordon had taken me out to dinner at a mid-range steakhouse. He had given me a card with a $100 bill in it and told me I needed to work harder if I wanted to succeed. He had been sitting on $50,000 of my money. I scrolled down. There was a handwritten addendum at the bottom of the will, initialed by my grandmother. If the family resources are ever used to control or silence a member of this bloodline, I instruct that the stewardship of the entire estate be transferred to the person who values the truth over the peace. I designate the independent auditor to be the final arbiter. Gordon had likely burned the original of this page. He had probably told the lawyers it was a draft that was never ratified. But Diane had the copy with the initials. He had stolen my inheritance, and then, 7 years later, he had handed me a bill for $300,000. The rage that filled me wasn't hot. It was absolute zero. It was a cold, crystalline clarity. I needed professional armor. I researched lawyers. I didn't want a family law specialist who would try to mediate a hug. I wanted a shark. I found a firm in downtown Raleigh that specialized in forensic accounting and trust fraud. I made an appointment for an emergency consultation. I walked into the office of Mr. Vance. He was a man in his 60s with eyes like flint and a suit that cost more than my car. I laid the dossier on his table. I laid the flowchart on his table. I laid the forged signature logs on his table. And finally, I laid the scan of the will on his table. He read through them in silence. The only sound in the office was the ticking of a grandfather clock. After 20 minutes, he took off his reading glasses. "Ms. Davis," he said, his voice grave. "This is not just a civil dispute. This is grand larceny. This is wire fraud. This is forgery. And if this entity, Apex, is what you say it is, this is money laundering." "I know," I said. "What is your goal?" he asked. "Do you want to send him to prison, or do you want your money?" "I want the truth on the record," I said. "And I want to ensure that, when this blows up, he cannot blame me." "Then we need to secure your position," Vance said. "I will draft a formal letter of preservation to your father. We will file a petition to compel a forensic accounting of the trust. But more importantly, we need to protect you from the corporate angle." He advised me to go back to Stonehaven and file a preemptive affidavit regarding the forged signatures. I did exactly that. I contacted Veronica Miller at HR. Veronica, I said, I have reason to believe that the leak my former manager accused me of was actually a cover for identity theft. I have evidence that my signature was forged on financial documents outside of this company. I am submitting a formal request for Stonehaven's legal team to be aware that my identity may have been compromised by a third party, specifically the client in question. Veronica was silent for a moment. You are saying your father forged your signature on his own business documents. I am saying I have a PDF where I authorized a $22,000 transfer at the exact minute I was sitting in your office for a compliance seminar. I said. Send it, she said. If he is dragging our compliance officer into external fraud, we will defend you. We do not like being used as accessories. I had the law, I had the corporation, I had the evidence. Now, I needed the family. But I wasn't going to drag them into a room and scream at them. That would give Gordon the chance to interrupt, to gaslight, to play the victim. I needed them to see it for themselves. I decided to set a trap, not a trap of force, but a trap of light. Gordon was currently scrambling. He knew Uncle Ray had called the bank. He was likely trying to forge new documents, trying to fix the books before the hard copies arrived. He needed time. I wasn't going to give him time. I opened my email. I drafted a message. I addressed it to Gordon Blake. I CC'd Haley. Subject discrepancy. Resolution. Urgent. Father. In reviewing the statement of financial liability you presented to me on Sunday, I have found several accounting errors. Specifically, the cross-reference between the family trust outflows and the personal expense columns seems to be misaligned by approximately $340,000. I have prepared a corrected audit. I am happy to submit this corrected audit to the family group and Uncle Ray, so we can settle the debt accurately. However, given the sensitivity of the Apex Strategic Consulting line items, I thought I should give you the opportunity to review my findings first. I have attached the flowchart. Please let me know if you would like to discuss this before I finalize the report for the extended family. Regards, Scarlett. I attached the simple, damning image I had created, the black box, the arrows pointing to Haley's vanity and his greed. I hit send. I sat back and watched the clock. This was the light trap. If he was innocent, he would call me and ask what I was talking about. If he was guilty and if he was terrified, he would view this email as a nuclear threat. He would see that I was prepared to send this chart to everyone. He would see that I knew about Apex. He would panic. He would realize that he couldn't silence me one-on-one anymore. He would realize that his only chance to survive was to discredit me publicly, in front of everyone, before I could hit send on that report. He would call a meeting. He would try to put me on trial again, and that was exactly what I wanted. Because this time, I wasn't bringing a dossier of silence. I was bringing the witnesses he had lied to. My phone rang. It wasn't Gordon. It was a notification from the family group chat, a chat I had been silent in for days. Haley. Emergency family meeting. Tomorrow night. Dad's house. Everyone must come. We are under attack. I smiled. He had taken the bait. He was going to try to execute me again, but he didn't know that this time. I wasn't coming alone. The screen of my phone lit up at 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon, signaling the beginning of the assault. It started not with a shout, but with a notification from Cousin Mike. He had forwarded me a message he had just received from Haley. It was a screenshot of a bank statement, grainy, heavily cropped, and visibly manipulated. Look at this. Haley's caption read, "We didn't want to say anything because we wanted to protect her, but Scarlett has been diverting the family trust into her own offshore account for years. Daddy is trying to cover for her, but I can't let him take the fall." I stared at the image. It was a clumsy forgery. She had taken a legitimate statement from the family trust, used a basic photo editing tool to paste my name over the beneficiary field, and blurred the dates. To the untrained eye of my elderly relatives, it would look damning. To a forensic analyst, it looked like a desperate joke. Haley was launching a scorched earth campaign. She knew I had the real data. She knew I had the flowchart. So, Her strategy was to muddy the waters so thoroughly that when I finally presented the truth, everyone would view it as just another mudball in a dirty fight. She was trying to drag me down to her level, where facts didn't matter. Only volume did. I did not reply to Mike. I did not post a defense. I simply saved the image to my evidence folder, time-stamped it, and labeled it Exhibit D Defamation and Malicious Fabrication. Then, my phone buzzed again. It was Evan Caldwell. I hesitated. My lawyer, Mr. Vance, had told me not to engage with him, but the preview of the message made my blood run cold. They are making me sign an affidavit. The text read, "They want me to swear that I saw you plug a USB drive into the secure server rack on Monday morning. Scarlett, I can't do this." I sat down at my desk. This was the escalation I had feared. Gordon wasn't just relying on Haley's sloppy Photoshop skills. He was leveraging his influence to manufacture a criminal record. If Evan signed that affidavit, Stonehaven would have no choice but to press charges. I would be arrested for corporate espionage. My credibility would be incinerated instantly. I broke my rule. I typed back, "If you sign a false affidavit, you are committing perjury. I have the logs. Evan, I was not in the building." His reply came 3 seconds later. Frantic. "I know, but your father. He promised me." I stared at the screen. "Promised you what he said. He knows the CEO of Titan Logistics in Charlotte." Evan wrote, "He said if I handle this personnel issue quietly and make sure you are discredited, he will guarantee me the VP of Operations role there. He said he has the pull." I let out a short, sharp breath. The twist wasn't that Gordon was bribing him. The twist was that Gordon was lying to him. I knew for a fact that Gordon did not know the CEO of Titan Logistics. He had met him once at a charity golf tournament 5 years ago. Gordon was trading favors he did not possess to buy the destruction of his own daughter. "Evan," I typed, "Gordon does not know the CEO of Titan. He is lying to you just like he lied to his brother. If you sign that paper, you go to jail for him, and you get nothing. If you tell the truth to HR, you keep your license." I watched the 3 dots of his typing bubble appear, then disappear, then appear again. "I am going to HR." Evan finally replied, "I am sending them the emails where Gordon laid out the deal. I'm sorry. Scarlett." I took a screenshot. Gordon's flank had just collapsed. He had tried to outsource his dirty work to a weak man, forgetting that weak men crumble under pressure. 10 minutes later, the official invitation arrived. It came via email, addressed to the entire extended family, all 100 of them. The subject line was Family Unity and Reconciliation. "Dearest family, it has been a difficult week. Misunderstandings have occurred. Emotions have run high. In the spirit of our grandmother's legacy, we are hosting an emergency family gathering tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. The goal is to clear the air, settle all financial questions, and restore peace to the Blake name. Scarlett has been invited to return the missing assets and apologize. We hope to move forward with love." It was a masterclass in manipulation. He had framed the meeting as a reconciliation, but the subtext was clear: come watch Scarlett apologize for stealing. He was setting the stage for a show trial. He expected me to either not show up, which would look like guilt, or to show up alone and be shouted down by a mob he had already poisoned with Haley's fake screenshots. He thought he was setting a trap. He didn't realize he was building his own gallows. I hit reply all. I will be there. I wrote, I did not add with love. I did not add to apologize. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the firm of Vance Associates. "Mr. Vance," I said when he answered. "The meeting is tomorrow night. I need the auditor." "I have just the man," Vance said. "David Ross. He is a forensic accountant who used to work for the FBI. He doesn't speak much, but when he does, people tend to listen. He will meet you at the perimeter." "Thank you," I said. Then I called Uncle Ray. "Scarlett?" His voice was anxious. "Did you see what Haley posted? People are saying terrible things." "I saw it. Uncle Ray," I said calmly. "It is not true. And tomorrow night, I am going to prove it. But I need you to do something for me. I need you and Aunt Diane to meet me at the end of the driveway at 6:50. Do not go inside without me." We will be there, Ray said. We got the package from the bank today. Scarlett, I haven't opened it yet. I wanted to wait for you. Bring it, I said. Bring it sealed. Saturday passed in a blur of cold preparation. I did not pace. I did not cry. I spent the day assembling the physical copies of the truth. I printed the timeline. I printed the metadata logs. I printed the email from Evan confessing to the bribe. I printed the flowchart. I printed the forged signature analysis. I placed each document into a crisp, black binder. I made 5 copies. At 5 o'clock in the evening, my phone rang. Mom. I stared at the screen. I almost didn't answer. I knew what this was. This was the final attempt to soften the target. I answered. Hello, Mother? Scarlett? Marianne's voice was shaking. She sounded small, fragile. Please, don't do this. Don't do what? I asked, putting the final binder into my tote bag. Don't come tonight, she pleaded. Just stay away. Your father is in a rage. Haley is hysterical. If you come, it will be a scene. It will be ugly. Just let us tell them you are sick. Let us tell them you are getting help. We can fix this later. Quietly. You mean you can lie to them? I said. You want to tell them I am mentally unstable, so that when they find out the money is gone, you can blame it on my episode. We are trying to protect the family name, Marianne cried out. Why do you hate us so much? Why do you want to humiliate me in front of my sisters? I don't hate you, Mom, I said. I felt a pang of pity, but I crushed it instantly. Pity was a weakness she would exploit. I just hate the lies. You stood there on my birthday and watched Dad hand me a bill for my existence. You took my picture off the wall. You chose your side. I had to, she sobbed. He is my husband. And I was your daughter, I said. You chose silence. Mother, tonight, I choose the truth. And if the truth humiliates you, then you should have lived a different life. I hung up. I checked my appearance in the mirror. I wasn't wearing the soft, floral dress I usually wore to family functions to blend in. I was wearing my charcoal gray interview suit. Sharp lines, high collar, no jewelry. I looked like an auditor coming to close a bankrupt branch. I drove to the house. The driveway was full, just like it had been on my birthday. The same cars, the same relatives, the same humidity hanging in the air. But the mood was different. There was no music playing from the house, no laughter drifting across the lawn. The house loomed dark and silent against the twilight sky, like a fortress bracing for a siege. At the bottom of the driveway, I saw Uncle Ray's battered truck. Beside it stood a generic sedan. Uncle Ray and Aunt Diane were standing by the truck, holding hands. Next to them was a man in a beige trench coat holding a briefcase. David Ross. I parked my car. I stepped out. Ready? I asked Ray. He looked pale, clutching a large, sealed FedEx envelope from the bank as if it contained a bomb. I am ready, Ray said, his jaw set. Mr. Ross? I nodded to the accountant. Ms. Davis, he replied. His voice was gravel. I have reviewed the digital files you sent. I am very interested to hear Mr. Blake's explanation. We walked up the driveway together, a phalanx of 4. I reached the front door, the same door I had walked out of 6 days ago. I didn't knock. I turned the handle and pushed it open. The foyer was crowded. Cousins were whispering in huddled groups. When they saw me, the noise died instantly. It rippled through the house, a wave of silence spreading into the dining room. I walked in. Ray, Diane, and David Ross flanked me. We entered the main dining hall. It was set up exactly as it had been on my birthday. The long table, the 100 chairs. Gordon sat at the head, looking regal and grim. Haley sat to his right, clutching a handkerchief, playing the role of the victimized sister perfectly. When Gordon saw me, his eyes narrowed. Then he saw Ray. Then he saw the stranger in the trench coat. His confidence flickered. Scarlett, Gordon said, standing up. He forced a smile that looked like a rictus of pain. I see you brought guests. This was intended to be a family discussion. It is a family discussion, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. Uncle Ray is family, Aunt Diane is family, and Mr. Ross here is an independent forensic accountant who is going to ensure that the numbers we discuss tonight are accurate. A murmur went through the crowd. Forensic accountant Haley stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "How dare you?" she shouted, pointing a manicured finger at me. "You steal from us, and then you bring a stranger into our home to intimidate Daddy. You have no shame. Get out. Everyone knows what you did." She looked around the room, trying to rally the mob. "She hacked the accounts," Haley screamed. "She stole the college funds. I have the proof on my phone." I didn't look at her. I looked at the wall behind Gordon. The space where my picture used to be was still empty. A blank rectangle of lighter paint on the dark wallpaper. They had removed me. They had erased me. They thought that by taking down a photograph, they could delete my history and rewrite my character. I walked over to the table. I didn't sit in the accused's chair. I stood at the opposite end of the table from Gordon, facing him directly. I placed the black binders on the table. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I placed the thumb drive containing the digital logs. Finally, I took the sealed FedEx envelope from Uncle Ray's trembling hands. I placed it on top of the stack. The room was so quiet, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hall. "I am not here to apologize," I said, "and I am not here to argue with Instagram posts." I looked at Gordon. He was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. He knew what was in the FedEx envelope. He knew the game was over. "I am here," I said, placing my hand on the binder, "to balance the ledger." I opened the cover of the first binder. "Shall we begin with the year 2019? I asked. Gordon opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I looked at the empty spot on the wall one last time. "You took down my picture. I thought, so I brought you a mirror." "Turn to page 1, I commanded, and the trial began. The air in the room was thick enough to choke on. 100 people were packed into the Blake dining hall, occupying the same chairs they had sat in just 6 days ago. But the festive pretense was gone. There were no napkins folded into swans. There was no smell of roast beef. There was only the smell of nervous sweat and the heavy static charge of impending violence. Gordon stood at the head of the table. He was wearing his best suit, a navy blue custom piece that usually signaled authority. But tonight, it looked like a costume. His face was flushed, a map of broken capillaries spreading across his cheeks. He was sweating, a sheen of moisture on his upper lip that he refused to wipe away. He slammed his hand on the mahogany table. The sound made Cousin Sarah jump. "We are here because there has been a breach of trust," Gordon announced. His voice was loud, booming, trying to fill the room with the force of his personality. "A profound, heartbreaking breach of trust. My daughter, Scarlett, has lost her way. She has allowed jealousy and mental instability to cloud her judgment. She has attacked this family. She has attacked her sister. She has attacked me." He pointed a shaking finger at me. I stood at the opposite end of the table, my hands resting calmly on the stack of black binders. "I called this meeting to give her a chance," Gordon continued, his eyes darting around the room, checking the faces of the relatives, looking for the nods of agreement he was used to receiving. "I want to give her a chance to recant, to apologize, to hand over the passwords she stole, and to admit that she manufactured these lies about the family fund." He looked at me. "Scarlett, tell them you are sorry. Tell them you are sick, and we will get you the help you need. We will not press charges if you fix this right now." It was a bold gambit. He was betting everything on the hope that I was still the terrified daughter who would crumble under public pressure. He was betting that the shame of the room would crush me. I looked at him. I looked at Haley, who was staring at her phone, refusing to make eye contact. I looked at Marianne, who was wringing her hands in her lap, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth. I did not apologize. I opened the first binder. The snap of the metal rings was sharp and clear in the silence. "I have a question," I said. My voice was not loud. but it cut through the room like a razor. I want everyone in this room to ask themselves one thing. When you wrote a check to Gordon Blake, what did he tell you the money was for? Gordon's eyes widened. Do not answer her. She is trying to confuse you. I ignored him. I looked directly at Cousin Mike. Mike, I said, 2 years ago, you transferred $20,000. Why? Mike shifted in his seat. He looked at Gordon, then back at me. He said it was a bridge loan for a commercial real estate deal. He said it would yield 8% interest. I nodded. I turned to Aunt Diane. Aunt Diane, I said, the $15,000 from November, what was that for? Sarah's tuition fund, Diane whispered. He said it was going into a tax-free education trust. Great Uncle Peter's, I said, looking at the elderly man in the back. The monthly check for $2,000. Maintenance of the family cemetery plots, the old man wheezed, and the Legacy Preservation Fund. I looked back at Gordon. He was pale now. The sweat was dripping down his temple. 3 people, I said. 3 different stories. Commercial real estate, education, cemetery maintenance. I picked up the flow chart I had created. It was printed on large, 11 by 17 paper. I held it up. This is where the money actually went. I walked down the length of the table, placing a copy of the chart in front of every major family head. The money from Mike did not go to real estate, I said, pointing to the black line on the chart. It went to account 449, and 48 hours later, it was transferred to the dealership to pay for the lease on a Porsche Cayenne, Haley's Porsche. Haley stood up. That is a lie. I pay for my own car. No, you don't, I said. I pulled a document from the binder. Here is the wire transfer from account 449 to the dealership. Here is the registration, and here is the date Mike sent his check. They match within 24 hours. The room erupted in whispers. The money from Aunt Diane, I continued, my voice rising over the noise. It didn't go to a tuition trust. It went to Apex Strategic Consulting. Gordon lunged forward. That is a legitimate firm. They handle our risk assessment. Mr. Ross, I said, turning to the forensic accountant standing by the door. Can you tell us what Apex Strategic Consulting is? David Ross stepped forward. He didn't look at the family. He looked at his notes. Apex Strategic Consulting was incorporated in Delaware 18 months ago, Ross said. His voice was dry, factual, boring. It has no physical address. It has no employees. Its sole bank account is held at a virtual bank. The signatory on the account is Gordon Blake. The withdrawals from Apex are almost exclusively used to pay down a personal credit card ending in 7721. He looked up. We pulled the credit card statements, Ross said. The charges include luxury resort fees in Tulum, high-end clothing retailers, and membership dues for the Raleigh Country Club. Gordon slammed his fist on the table again. You have no right. Those are private records. Scarlett stole them. She hacked my system. Actually, Ross said calmly, we didn't hack anything. We received these records from Mr. Ray Blake, who is a joint signatory on the originating account. He requested them from the bank yesterday. Uncle Ray stood up. He was holding the FedEx envelope I had given him. He hadn't spoken yet. He looked at his brother with a kind of sorrow that was heavier than anger. I opened the envelope. Gordon, Ray said softly. Gordon froze. I read them, Ray said. Every page. You spent it all. You spent Diane's money. You spent Mom's money. You spent the money for the kids. Ray, listen to me, Gordon pleaded, his voice cracking. It is a liquidity issue. The market has been volatile. I had to move things around to keep the account stable. I was going to put it back. I always put it back. You didn't put it back, Ray said. He threw the envelope onto the table. It slid across the wood and hit the centerpiece. You stole it, Haley screamed. It was a high, piercing sound. She faked it. Scarlett faked the bank records. She is a computer genius. She can fake anything. Look at the screenshot I sent you. She is the one stealing. I turned to Haley. I didn't yell. I looked at her with pity. Haley, I said, the screenshot you sent to the family group, The one showing I had an offshore account. Yes, Haley cried. Proof. Mr. Ross analyzed the metadata of that image. I said. Ross cleared his throat. The image was created yesterday at 4:15 in the afternoon using Adobe Photoshop Express on an iPhone 14. The font used for the bank name does not match the official bank typeface, and the account number listed for Ms. Davis is actually the routing number for a branch in Ohio that closed in 2012. Haley's mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked at Gordon, waiting for him to save her, but Gordon wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the room. He was watching the realization wash over 100 faces. The whispers had stopped. The room was silent again, but it wasn't the silence of respect. It was the silence of predators recognizing prey. There is one more thing, I said. I reached into the final section of the binder. The grandmother's will. Marianne gasped. Her hand flew to her throat. Grandma left a specific fund, I said. The Martha Blake Memorial Fund. She intended it for the grandchildren. She specifically wrote that it was to be used to ensure our independence. I held up the scan of the will that Aunt Diane had kept. Gordon told us that fund was empty. He told us Grandma died with debt. I looked at my father. But the records show that the fund had $200,000 in it 10 years ago, and the records show that on the day after Grandma's funeral, Gordon transferred the entire balance to his personal account. She wanted me to have it, Gordon shouted. He was losing control completely now. He was shaking. She knew I was the one who kept this family together. She knew I needed the capital to maintain the house, to maintain the image. I did it for all of you. You did it for yourself, I said. And the will has a clause. Dad, Article 7. I read it aloud. If the family resources are ever used to control or silence a member of this bloodline, I instruct that the stewardship of the entire estate be transferred to the person who values the truth over the peace. I placed the paper on the table. You didn't just steal from us, I said. You stole from the dead, and you used her name to guilt people into giving you more money. Marianne started to cry. It wasn't a dignified weep. It was a harsh, ugly sobbing. She wasn't crying because she was sorry. She was crying because the curtain had been ripped down. The neighbors would know. The church would know. The illusion of the perfect Blake family was dissolving into sewage. I can explain, Gordon yelled. He looked desperate. I just needed time. I was going to flip the investment. I was going to pay everyone back with interest. I am Gordon Blake. I always win. You didn't win, Cousin Mike said. Standing up, his face was red. You robbed me. I want my money back. Gordon, now. I can't, Gordon stammered. It is tied up. It is illiquid. It is gone, I corrected him. It is in Haley's closet. It is in the wine cellar. It is in the walls of this house. I am calling the police, Great Uncle Peter said. He pulled out his phone with trembling hands. This is fraud. This is elder abuse. No, Marianne shrieked. No, police. Please, we can work this out. There is nothing to work out, Aunt Diane said. Her voice was cold. She stepped away from the table, away from Gordon, as if he were contagious. You took Sarah's tuition. You monsters. The room descended into chaos. People were shouting. Cousins were pulling out their phones to check their own bank accounts. Uncle Ray was shouting at Gordon, demanding answers. Haley was sobbing, trying to grab her purse to run, but was blocked by two aunts who looked ready to tear her apart. Gordon stood in the center of the storm. He looked small. He looked old. He looked at me. You did this, he whispered. You ruined us. I looked at him. I picked up my empty binder. I picked up my purse. I didn't ruin you. Father, I said. I just turned on the lights. I turned around. Mr. Ross, I said. We are done here. I believe we are, Ross said. We walked toward the door. Scarlett, Gordon screamed after me. You walk out that door, and you are dead to me. You are no daughter of mine. You will have nothing. I stopped at the threshold. the same place where I had stood 6 days ago when I was fired. I turned back one last time. The room was a wreckage of broken trust. My mother was weeping on the floor. My sister was being screamed at by her own cousins. My father was a king whose castle had turned to sand. "You are wrong," I said. "I have everything." I looked at Uncle Ray, who gave me a nod of grim gratitude. "I have the truth," I said, "and I have my self-respect. Keep the money. Dad, you are going to need it for the lawyers." I walked out the door. I walked down the steps. I walked past the manicured lawn that had been paid for with stolen money. I walked to my car. The night air was cool. The humidity had broken. I got into my car, the rental I had paid for with my own money. I started the engine. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to. I knew what was happening inside. The kingdom had fallen. I drove down the winding driveway, the headlights cutting through the darkness. They thought they had disowned me. They thought they had cast me out into the cold. But as I turned onto the main road, accelerating toward the city, toward my job, toward a life that was finally completely mine, I realized the truth. I wasn't disowned. I was set free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Scarlett and her fight for the truth. I would love to hear from you. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from right now. Are you in your car, at the gym? Cooking dinner? Let's connect in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button so we can share this story with even more people. Your support means the world to me. See you in the next story.